I've been trying to keep this channel more focused on one specific thing, my media reviews, especially after whatever happened last year. However, today's video is going to be quite different than my usual fare. I say that as if this kind of video is anything new. If you've been a longtime viewer, you've noticed that I developed quite a rogues gallery over my time in producing content for the internet. Back at the start, when I was going after a critic I didn't like called Biter, to my awkward middle years where seemingly everyone wanted to make a video on me or my creative projects or my Indiegogo, to more recently where I've had to throw punches at some ex-associates of mine for getting up to very unsavory activities. Everything from Star Giant Productions' exploits with minors, to Kyle, aka Neolfa's habit of Kanye posting, which he is still doing to this day. Even with all of that in mind, today's video is still going to be different. I'm not focusing too much on the visuals, so you get the fireplace again. But with that being said, it's on my main channel and not on my side channels because I want this video to be seen. And I have to warn you, we will be talking about some very dark subject matter. This may be the most dark, personal video I've ever made, will ever make. I have talked about worse subject matter in the video on Mystic Mongrel that I posted in the summer of last year. The difference of the person we are talking about today is that he has left us with a plethora of information that will allow us to see inside the mind of someone so fundamentally broken that you can seldom see them as human anymore. Today, we're going to be talking about my father. I carry my mother's maiden name. Jonathan Rosansky is my name. Rosansky is my maternal grandparents' name, and it was my mother's last name while she was still alive and before and after she married another man. That man was my stepfather, and I have talked about him, or at least hinted towards his effects on my development, but today is not about him. Today, we will be talking about a man with the last name Rao, Keith Rao. I feel that I finally have to talk about him, and I would not do this if he didn't cast the first stone. At some point in the past decade, he managed to discover my videos independently, and has apparently been watching the channel for quite some time. This wasn't very relevant to me until two things happened. My mother died in October of 2021. This caused many changes in not just my own life, but my father's life as well. He was incensed to write a series of books about his relationship with my mother, and dealing with the emotions that sprouted out from that. He wrote 4 of these books. There is a 5th one that's just a compilation of the first 4. In April of 2022, I got into the whole Turning Red debacle. If you've heard of me, you've heard of it. I made a fool of myself one day on the internet, and I've been trying to live it down ever since. Plain and simple. I have other videos going over the situation, and there are better places to learn about that controversy in depth. Point being, a lot of people were shit-talking me at the time. And the thing was, despite everything going on, I didn't expect my own father to be one of those people shit-talking me. He had a video on his own YouTube channel, and the Kiwi farmers found it. The video has since been removed, but in that video, he revealed a lot of information about himself that, let's just say, didn't make him look very good. Within that video, he told me to read his books. You know, the whole me being a shitty writer thing. And you know, I'm not the best writer. Like, funny story. One day, my mother and my stepfather heard me reading one of my not funny stories and laughed and heckled all the way through. You know, back when I was in middle school. I get it. I'm not that great. The past couple of months, I read his books. At least as much as I can stomach. It took me a while to find the time, after rehabilitating my image, taking care of some old trash. Even after all this time, though, I couldn't have the strength to push through and actually finish his books. I couldn't finish his books because they were, 1, very incoherent, but 2, they were some of the most horrifying pieces of media that I have ever come across. And as we talk about their contents, I hope it'll become particularly clear why I'm making this particular video. Needless to say, I have a lot on my mind. But before we actually go through the books, there are some things that we have to establish. My birthday is July 21st, 1992. At the time this video comes out in early 2025, I'm 32 years old. I was born in the state of Massachusetts, I live in the state of Massachusetts, and the way things are going, I'll probably die in the state of Massachusetts. All of this information is public in some way, shape, or form. The one thing that I have had to make public that wasn't when I first decided to talk about this was my mother's age when I was born. My mother, Jennifer, or Jen, was 16 when I was born. Her birthday was January 4th. I wasn't an early birth or anything like that. So she was 15 when I was conceived. Why she carried me to term, I never asked, and I'll never really know now. In late 1991, my father was 18 years old, conceiving a child with a 15-year-old teenage girl. This was and is a crime in the state of Massachusetts, even though the statute of limitations has long since passed, and the main victim in the situation has passed on and cannot get justice for this action. I consider my father a groomer. This wasn't exactly the term back in the 1990s, but it's what he did. When my mother got pregnant, he was more or less gone, and it's not like he had a lack of opportunity. His parents, my paternal grandparents, actually did stay in my life and gave me connections to that side of my family as well, allowing me to meet my cousins, uncles, and so on. As far as I understand it, they also paid his child support obligations. I did get to see my father during this time. In my compilation of poems, I describe it as this. He looked at me like a bitch, pretending she didn't shit on the floor. I have a distinct memory of this man, looking up at him as a kid about 6, maybe 7, and thinking, why am I calling this man father? Because I legitimately did not know. I want to be clear. My stepfather was anything but a saint, but I guess that he fit the child's definition of a father more than this man. At some point, this man went and started a new family that he actually wanted to stick with. Whole new kids and everything, that I am keeping as anonymous as possible. Seriously, do not look them up. For reasons that I won't get into, around the time I turned 18 and graduated from high school, my stepfather flew the coop. My parents, for all intents and purposes, were split up. Then this man tries to get back with my mother, and even back into my own life, after more or less ignoring me for 18 years. At some point, by his own admission, he got his own hollyhock letter from my mother, and as far as I can tell, they never spoke again during her life. This is, technically speaking, no one's business. It should be no one's business, but Keith and the people that he directly hurt. The series of books that Keith Rao wrote is entitled Life, Love, and the Paranormal. It starts with volume 1 called Soul Bond. Let me read you a quote. Quote, when we got to my house, comma, she rushed me, comma, and told me to get in the house. She told my daughter, comma, who was on our porch, comma, to do it as well. She stated there was a gorilla-like demon trying to get us. I was much more scared at this point. We don't know what it wanted, comma, and our guides formed a massive line to protect us. They formed an energy blockade. After about 15 minutes of being freaked the hell out, comma, my wife's guides let her know, comma, it was defeated. I must remind you at this point, comma, there is good and evil, comma, on Earth, comma, and on the other side, unquote. I'm going to state bluntly what these books are. They are the ramblings of a raving lunatic. But beyond that, they are a desperate attempt of a groomer to try and heighten the literal crimes he committed to some form of love eternal. You know, the teenage girl that he impregnated and then avoided for 18 years. Quote, I thought at the time, comma, we were high school sweethearts, comma, destined to be together forever. We had a lot of good times together, exclamation point. We were young, comma, and she got pregnant. At this point, comma, things had gotten rough, comma, and we were arguing a lot, comma, like a reaction, comma, of two young star-crossed lovers, comma, having to grow up, comma, way too fast, end quote. Quote, we were young, comma, and I remember her telling us, comma, we had to be quiet, comma, or her parents would hear, comma, and they would get in trouble, end quote. The whole collection spans hundreds of pages. The first one was written a scant 2 months after my mother died, and I can't communicate how much shaking I've done just writing the script for this video. The books are horrifying in a sense, but in another sense, they are morbidly fascinating. It's one of the few times in life you get to watch a groomer so desperately try to craft a narrative, maybe not to the public, but to himself, that he was in the right about everything that he did, when there's no way to make what he did look right. Reading his books causes me literal pain. And that's just what I can comprehend beyond the nonsensical ramblings. Half of the time, it sounds like the man is either in a cult or starting one. And I know that occultism is a thing, but at one point he's going on about his guardian angel merging with him, and it's just a buffet of random beliefs that don't connect or make any sense in one unified system. Quote, I was carrying around a tiger's eye crystal for protection in my pocket and it vanished. I had no idea where it went, but just recently after I learned of Jen's passing, it magically reappeared. My wife's PK manifestation told her he didn't like that stone at first, and said it was returned after he removed what he didn't like from it. I left that very stone on Jen's grave. It's just something I was called to do. It was recharged before leaving it there, and its protective properties were restored. Unquote. Quote, a PK manifestation, in simple terms, is a negative entity created by our subconscious mind, usually due to trauma, constantly being negative, or from the anger within yourself. Unquote. If you're not up and up on your occultism, a PK manifestation is psychokinesis, or in some cases, influencing random events. A PK manifestation doesn't tell you jack shit. And I want to make it clear, I have my own personal belief system that might not be 100% rational and connected to reality itself. For example, I might feel tempted to wear a sunstone for protection from this guy. But it's one thing to come across a guy who thinks that he's fighting ghost gorillas on his porch and is an empath, but it's an entirely different thing to see that this guy is going through this whole background love quest with the ghost of your dead mother. Quote, "The universe has bigger plans for our souls, and I am going to enjoy every minute of the ride. This gives me another chance to have a relationship with the beautiful soul Jen is deep down inside, in a way I never expected or imagined possible in this lifetime. Spirits have many things they must do on that side. This could be a multitude of things, and I'm not versed in the many different types of tasks that spirits are assigned. Jen is presently reading a book. Neither my wife nor I know exactly what the book is, but she is spending a good deal of time reading it." Unquote. He's writing this about a woman who died a month ago, while married to a woman who I'm not even going to get into. Also, you might have noticed that I stopped pointing out his wonton commas. If you actually look into the actual book, it's very hard to parse. The guy writes like Shatner speaks. Quote, "Jen's spirit told me she wanted to right her wrongs, and this may be her way of doing that." Unquote. My mother was not perfect. She had flaws, as any human being does. And if there is an afterlife, she'll have to account for that, as we all must. My father is not the one she would look to help her. And if he thinks otherwise, it's the most unbelievable account in a book of magic stones and spirit melding. Quote, "In a sense, Jen's spirit may live vicariously through me. Much like people still don't fully understand autism, I may also be a piece of the puzzle for others who are also experienced this or have previously." Unquote. Throughout the books, he claims to have Asperger's syndrome, which he claims was diagnosed after I was diagnosed. And he also claims that he was diagnosed with ADD. I was diagnosed with Asperger's in 2012, and I couldn't have possibly made it public until I have a platform, which could have only been like as early as mid-2013. In 2013, Asperger's syndrome was removed from the DSM and placed under the broad umbrella of autism spectrum disorder, and it's not really a singular diagnosis anymore, because Hans Asperger, the guy the condition was named after, was a very, very bad World War II person. As for ADD, it is flat out not a diagnosis anymore. There is only ADHD, which has the subdiagnoses of primarily hyperactive, primarily inattentive, or combined. To be fair, it took me a while to catch on to those kind of things myself, so I'm not accusing him of, self-diagnosis. I'm accusing him of being a dickhole. Quote, "I woke up, my wife texted me and asked me if I could make dinner because she was working. As a person who lives with autism, this can be a struggle for me. The first problem was the fact she just dropped it on me, and sudden change is something that affects many people with autism negatively." End quote. You're over 50, dude. Quote, "Jen's spirit was having some animosity at this point, but can you blame her? She didn't understand the concept of polyamory. Her spirit said she didn't want to be a side chick, and I did my best to explain that's not how it's supposed to be. For those of you who may be in tears or disbelief at this point, trust me, I have cried many tears in the last month. If in the grand scheme of things, the only positive that happened in her life was the time her and her family got together over her final years in this realm, I am glad that I helped to make that happen. To those who are angry at this story right now, I implore you to look inward and see what inside is causing this anger. I also implore you, before judging me, know that we all have deep dark secrets, and no one on this planet knows everything about you, except you and those you will meet after leaving the earthly realm. Be glad you were lucky enough to have whatever relationship you had before Jen passed. I didn't get the opportunity. If this is hard for you to fathom, imagine how it must be for me, as a person with Asperger's syndrome. Things like experiences I have been having are very hard to believe." End quote. For those who are wondering, abandoning a pregnant teenager is not a known symptom of autism spectrum disorder, or ADHD, or ADD, or Asperger's syndrome, or any known disorder except for being a shit human being. I've been speaking publicly about my feelings and the most deep personal and interpersonal things that I've been going through for over a decade now. And even with that, I don't have even a hope of grasping or communicating not just my anger, but my sadness, my pain, my disgust, and to an extent, my disbelief that this person exists. Not just that he exists, but that he is related to me in some way. The worry and the fear that the poison of what he is in my bloodstream, and the worms eating his brain might someday devour mine. Like, some of the passages in these books come across as like a type of schizophrenia, which, can be hereditary. But then again, maybe it's not schizophrenia. There's enough foresight and intelligence and attachment to reality to try and protect himself. He never says Jen's age once. It's just, We were young. Some of you also may be so bold as to try to pull the argument, it was just a 3-year age gap. And honestly, killing that argument where it stands is a reason I am making this video. If it's someone like a 27-year-old and a 30-year-old, yeah, that's fine. It's whatever. But an 18-year-old and a 15-year-old, no. And honestly, this man here is a good case study as to why it's such a bad idea. Because he is an example of one of the worst things that can happen to a 15-year-old dating an 18-year-old. Quote, "The saddest part is my own parents, despite our checkered relationship, didn't have the decency to tell me the mother of my child had passed away out of respect in the least. I think they had a part in interfering in my relationship with mine and Jen's son by taking him on trips on weekends when he would go places with them and I likely had to work or couldn't go with them." End quote. Funny story, he was there on some of those vacations. He fucking lived at my grandparents' house for a time when I was doing those weekend visits. As in, visits for the entire weekend. Friday evening to Sunday afternoon. He had opportunities. And I can't believe that he is trying to play this off like this. I don't know what my grandparents know about Keith's activities or what they think about him nowadays. They don't talk about him, and I'm not one inclined to ask. But I do know that they gave him more chances than he ever deserved. And if they have no respect for him, I can completely understand. You want a sign of my respect for you, Keith? The wrong parent died. Look, I don't know what you were expecting. Genuinely. But you told me to read your book, so I'm reading your book. And I'm going to keep continuing until either I feel satisfied or too numb and broken to continue. Vote in the comments below to guess which one it is. And yes, I know that Keith is watching this video. I'm not a moron. Quote, "In my travels for work sometimes, my deliveries would take me down the street where Jen lived with her parents. Our son's house is right next door. The few months before she passed, when I drove by, I never really seen anyone outside, and always wondered what she was up to. I hope she was doing well. I thought maybe at some point I would see her outside, sometime around the time she passed, but before I knew she had, I seen her mother coming home one day when I was on another delivery. She looked kind of down. For all I know, that could have been the day Jen passed. After Jen's passing, I will get deliveries, and yet again, they will take me past their home." End quote. Keep in mind, this video isn't the result of me doing an elaborate investigation, trying to poke or prod at anything, getting testimonies and all of that. I remind you, after my mother died, less than 3 months passed, he wrote these books, at least the first one. For some reason that I cannot comprehend. Everything in these books is self-admitted with no prompting. And I can understand someone who isn't chronically online, not really connecting how constantly driving by the house of your ex and then admitting it in a book looks absolutely horrendous on you. But with how much the man has been cyberstalking me, he should know something about how your online activities play out. Quote, "Ironically, the video is about the top 10 worst songs in Disney movies. John just happened to release a video about music when the next chapter in my journey was going to be about frequencies and vibrations." End quote. Quote, "In the video, mine and Jen's son stated he couldn't understand why ballads and love songs were the most popular songs in those movies. What he was experiencing was a failure of imagination." End quote. Oh, I have plenty of imagination. At one point in time, I imagined that you could have been a good dad. That's just pure fantasy. Keith, I want to make something as clear to you as I can. You ran. I'd say, like a bastard, but I'm not exactly one to run from a conflict, am I? You had ample chances to return to my life. Everyone gave you more mercy than you ever deserved. Because you didn't take those chances, the love of your life, this soul bond, fell into the arms of a man who was psychologically abusive to both her and your son. That man spanked with implements, shouted and berated, used intimidation tactics like bending coins with his bare hands in front of us. He used computer spyware on us to remotely share our screens while we were browsing. He essentially put me personally through a struggle session when I was 10 years old and got a bad grade. As a teenager, I recall him in a room across the hall berating Jen until she broke down crying. That man owns those actions and many others. However, Keith, you own them too. They would have never happened if not for your dereliction of duty. At one point in time, I would have preferred the pile of whatever you are to that man. That time is long past. You are clearly the worst man between the two. I don't know why my mother carried me to term. Maybe it was the morals of the family as some nosy internet blogs speculate. Maybe it was her own morals. Maybe you promised to be there for her. I don't know. And at this point, it doesn't really matter. You could probably say a lot on why. Unfortunately, I can't take your word on anything because your word doesn't matter. There's only one thing that's really clear to me. I was never supposed to make it this far. With all the shit cards I've been dealt in life, To be as arrogant as I can, I think I played them well. I made something of myself in spite of it all. And the sad irony of the matter is that not getting the one thing that I so desperately wanted at one point in my life, you being in it, is clearly one of the things that helped me get to where I am today. I've been going on and on about how terrible you've been for abandoning Jen in her time of need. But honestly, staying the fuck out of my business might just be the best thing that you've ever done with your life. I have no idea what the hell I would be with all your cult bullshit, and I'm not gonna lie. I've been concerned and worried making this video. The man knows where I live. He has made that abundantly clear. It is also clear to me that he is not very stable. My cyberstalker lived a state away and her whole family is dying of AIDS or some shit. And Rebecca is too busy jacking off to make an hours-long drive. Those same excuses don't apply here. I'm not gonna lie and say that I'm not worried that he might do something in reaction to this video. But that worry, in a sense, is why this video had to be made. After all, if something happens to me, to my family, to anyone, well, where do you start the investigation? And the man just gives me the sense that he's a ticking time bomb regardless. In the past few years, I've discovered that there are things much more frightening than death. Like the delusional playing with your ghost after it. Keith, you have broken your own life, and the lives of who knows how many else in such unimaginable ways. I couldn't do that to my own life if I tried. But if you do have any modicum of humanity, any sort of soul to speak of, you will never mention Jen again, and you will never mention me again, or any other member of my family. Stop referring to me as your son. I am not your son. I am officially disowning you. I do not carry your last name, and I don't carry your last name for a reason. I'm not asking you to remove the old books. The damage from them is done. They make you look worse than they make me look at any rate. I'm asking you to not write another. And from this point onward, pretend I do not exist and never did. Stop following me on social media. Stop driving by my house. Stop driving by my family's house. I want to make it clear, this isn't a threat. I'm not going to do anything if you don't comply. You're not worth it. It's a plea, I guess, to prove to me that you have some sort of respect. It is the simplest thing I can ask you to do. The thing that you've always been good at. Ignore me and my life and my family. I don't know what happened to you. If you were always like this or if something broke along the way. I genuinely do not give a shit. Whether or not you keep obsessing about me and my mother, you do not exist to me any longer. So, if I just so happen to die before you, I want to make it known, you're the last person my ghost will ever talk to. And chat below, if you voted numb, you win! Give yourself a pat on the back and a well-earned what the fuck. I hope to have more uplifting videos soon.